Thanks. Oh, should be good to go.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay.
We're on there.
So bonjour, everyone. Don't worry, I'm not doing this workshop in French. I don't think I could if I wanted to, but I am new to Montreal. So if you happen to be from Montreal as well, would definitely love to connect after the workshop. A little bit about me just before we get into things. My name is Brooklin Myers. I'm the instructor at Dockyard Academy. I'm really happy to be giving this presentation because I'm getting vibes from when I was doing Dockyard Academy. It's been on kind of the back burner for a little while. I've been working with the LiveView Native team. So this has been my first opportunity in months now to properly teach. So really, really excited to be here and have all of you learning with me today. I'm also the host of the Elixir podcast. More recently, I have, like I mentioned, been working on LiveView Native. So I'm responsible for creating guides and documentation for LiveView Native, giving workshops like this, and just generally promoting and educating people about LiveView Native. For anyone who doesn't know what LiveView Native is, so first off, LiveView, that is a way of building websites with Phoenix. It uses a socket connection, so two-way communication. So it's this really wonderful pattern established by the Phoenix framework that makes it possible to build highly real-time systems with concurrency. They can integrate with things like a pub subsystem that makes it much easier to build these web applications that can have kind of simultaneous interactions between users. It's also incredibly efficient, uses things like Phoenix diffs to reduce the amount of information that's sent over the wire. So it just sends the page updates rather than kind of that traditional style of reloading the entire page. And so LiveView Native is bringing those amazing patterns to native. We currently have a client for SwiftUI for iOS devices, and we are working on an Android version as well so that we can be on both platforms. And in theory, it can run anywhere. So it could also be brought to Windows systems and all sorts of things. But right now, we're really focused on the iOS experience. As mentioned, I recently moved to Montreal. If I weren't doing this, I would actively be at a Lindy dance class right now and going to Café L'Univers for their Lindy socials. So if you are a Lindy dancer and interested in trying that, please reach out. I absolutely adore that community. It is the thing I am the most passionate about other than Elixir, and I also climb. Okay, what are we going to be learning about today? So the whole purpose of this workshop is to give you fundamentals of understanding LiveView Native. That's going to include understanding a bit of SwiftUI, as that's the area that is the most different from traditional LiveView development. So our goal is to be able to understand how can we take a SwiftUI example and convert that into LiveView Native code. And then with that, we will understand enough about some SwiftUI concepts like views, modifiers, attributes, so that you know how to build your own native UIs. As mentioned previously, this is a 4-hour workshop that's compressed into 2 hours. So we're just going to get as far as we possibly can and do our best here. So we've already walked through this, so I'm just going to skip ahead. We've covered the prerequisites. Hopefully folks have launched the Phoenix server. They've cloned the repo that has all of these steps. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and clone the repo. The message is in the chat. And they have started the native application, so they should be seeing hello SwiftUI. I know we're waiting for some downloads, but that's the point that everyone should get to as soon as they can. And then they should see the hello SwiftUI in their application. So this is kind of the starting point that everyone needs to get to participate in the workshop today. This is not going to be a follow-along workshop. I'm not going to be typing something in front of you and then asking you to type the same thing in real time. My experience is that that type of real-time learning can be very difficult. If Brian's here, that's not meant as a jab. I apologize. And I have a, hey, Brian, wonderful to see you. I have a really hard time keeping up. And so we're going to take breaks so that folks can do the exercises. And I'm going to explain the concepts beforehand, but you can refer back to the slides. So if anything's confusing or you miss any information while I'm talking about it, you have the slides linked in the README. And so you'll be able to go back and see the things that I reference. And of course, you can ask questions throughout if you have anything that you're curious about. Okay. So first, I just want to understand the native application here. So everyone should have their application open. And if they're looking at the native app here, let me actually switch my view. Hopefully I won't have to do this too much. I'm just going to go ahead and share the entire screen, and that way I won't have to keep switching back and forth. Okay. So the main file that we care about in the native application is the content view. This is what renders the native live view and establishes the connection with the server. So we can see that we have this live view right here. This little hashtag is basically just a macro. It's just generating some code. And the important part is that we're setting the development URL. We can also set the production URL. And we're saying here is where the server is. It's connecting to localhost on the base URL. There's some other views as well, like we have different views for different states. So if we disconnect from Wi-Fi or if we're reconnecting, we have some views, and this is all part of your native application. So you could customize these if you wanted to. And there's also an add-on for MapKit, which I doubt our ability to get to today, but we might get there. So this is an add-on package that is created by the LiveView Native team that adds support for using MapKit. And this is just some configuration for it. So that's everything that's important on the native side. On the Phoenix side, starting from our router, so this should look fairly familiar for anyone who's already used LiveView. Question is, my font size big enough? Are we seeing this, or is it a little too small?
I can see it.
Perfect. Okay. So we're just going to walk kind of top down, starting from our router, going into our LiveView, and then we're going to understand the native side of things. So from here, we are defining the route for our LiveView. That takes us to the Home Live module. Here we have a little bit of configuration for LiveView Native. It describes what formats we're going to be able to render. So here we are using SwiftUI. It also describes the layout that we're using. So one of the issues we encountered when building LiveView Native, as I understand it, is if we have something like a root layout that has HTML within it, but we can't send that on the native side because HTML and native just aren't compatible. And so this little bit of configuration here.
A little context there. The clients will ignore any elements and the children of that element that it doesn't know. So HTML is an unknown format to each of the individual clients. So the way that we're treating this is that HTML is a format, like JSON is a format, XML is a format, but then SwiftUI is a format. Jetpack will be a format. WinUI 3 will be a format. So that's how we're trying to conceptualize how LiveView Native works.
Exactly. And so we can actually see that when on the web. If you ever want to test the native application and see what the source code looks like, you can add a query parameter underscore format and then say SwiftUI. And this will actually show you the native source code being sent. If we want to see the whole thing, we can just right click and view our page source here. Perfect. That kind of is the exact same view, but hopefully that illustrates the point. From here, this is the web render, so we're just rendering nothing. That's why it's mostly empty. This is, we use render components now in LiveView Native. So
this should line, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, Robbie. Just that we are in active development at 0.3. I keep seeing things like, I need to fix this. Line 9 will, so.
Good to have that context.
Yeah, I know. So that line 9 may look like it's a throwaway, and it kind of is. If you have a LiveView endpoint that you aren't using HTML for, LiveView itself requires the render function to be defined in some way currently. And I got to talk to Jose or Chris about this to see if we can somehow get around that, or at the very least, if it's undefined, we just inject it automatically. And if you do define it, we don't override that. Because I think like adding that line 9 there just feels weird as a workaround.
Good to know. LiveView Native is constantly changing. For anyone who attended my last workshop when I promised that guides were coming soon, I want you to know it wasn't my fault. I wrote the guides, but they became inaccurate very quickly. So guides continue to be coming soon. Jumping back in, next we have the render component. So this is what is new in LiveView Native version 0.3 is now we have a render component that's namespaced by SwiftUI. So it corresponds to the LiveView. This is basically just defining the render function for native. It is pointing us towards the template, and LiveView Native has introduced a new template format called Neeks. So you may have heard of Heeks before. Long time ago in terms of the internet, it used to be Leaks that was most common, and now we have Neeks for native. And so this is what contains the actual template. So we go through those files. We have our LiveView, our render component, and then the place where the Hello World template actually lives is in the Neeks file. So does anyone have any questions about how these things hook together? Because from here, we're mostly going to be working with this file as well as one other that I'm going to show in a moment.
Yeah, Brooklyn, I have a bit of a question just in terms of, maybe it's more of a contextual question, but the intention potentially is that a user or a product owner, an app owner, you really want them to, they already have like a LiveView website or whatever for whatever they're doing. And now they're going to add a LiveView native view on top of that, right? It's potentially not going to look the way it looks on this demo because you're so focused only on the LiveView native. But if I was going to be building a app, I would probably have a web version, and now we're adding capability to bring in mobile.
I can,
yeah.
Brooklyn, want me to fill this one?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so I will be leaving in like 15 minutes, so I'll shut up at that point. Brooklyn can continue his workshop. But the, I mean, the path forward is multiple. So one of the value props is, yes, you have an existing LiveView application, and all of your event handlers are already defined. And so the idea then is that LiveView Native takes advantage of the state management that you already have written for the LiveView web application, and assuming that you're really just trying to create a presentation layer for native that is now representative of the actions and the events and you know, the navigation points that exist for web, then you're just adding templates at that point. Well, templates and styles. But you can also go down the path of, you don't need HTML. You can use LiveView Native as a standalone server-side rendering framework for building on native applications. I won't have Brooklyn get to it today, but we actually have a LiveView Native HTML client as well to kind of break out the pattern that you're seeing here of the render components. And the render components are intended to enforce isolation of each format targets in the same way that on Phoenix controllers, the pattern now is to actually delegate the template rendering to the individual render components. And so we've tried to mimic that same pattern with LiveView Native 0.3, which is all like a lot of the churn that Brooklyn was referencing a few minutes ago is what we're seeing right now, because we got this, like, it was like this one little change that occurred in Phoenix LiveView that we've been asking for a while, which was a way for us to, on the mount function, to delegate out to our own custom render function. That got into like 0.20.5 or 3, or I forget what version of 0.20 of LiveView, but around Christmas time. And you know, we were kind of dedicated on 0.2, and then like this came out, and like, all right, this is like the real way we need to be architecting this. And this has kind of necessitated this big push towards render components, isolation, and a lot of the architectural decisions you're going to see tonight.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I think especially I guess you're talking about sort of a WebAssembly potentially as the web portion of this, but it would be really interesting from a demo perspective if you were showing like, oh, I'm whatever, it's going to be a blog or whatever. It's like, oh, here it is on web and here it is in simulator simultaneously.
So we don't have a WebAssembly client. Like the idea would be that the existing LiveView is the web client. The existing Phoenix LiveView client is the web client. Just what I was referring to, LiveView HTML, is just a way for us to delegate out the HTML template rendering into its own render component, as opposed to handling the template rendering within the LiveView module itself.
I see. Okay.
I think it's also, so this wasn't originally intended to be part of my workshop here, but just to give kind of a demonstration of how the web side of this works, I do just want to show that we have the ability to just write our template in here the way that we normally would.
Mm-hmm.
So if we had some hello web text, and we go to our server without this format query param, we can see hello web. So we can write our web application in Normat.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so like the default is always the way that Phoenix LiveView already works. Like adding LiveView Native to the project doesn't require you to make any changes to your existing LiveView HTML application at all. It's additive. It doesn't like mutate anything under the hood in terms of like, oh, now we need to do these other things for, to get our regular LiveView application working again.
Yep, exactly. I think I'm going to grab the reins back here just because time-wise, I want to make sure we hit certain beats and have time for exercise. So the next thing I want to talk about is how essentially styling is done within LiveView Native. So let me just get back to my slides here. We talked about the different files that are important. There is one more file that I want to talk about, and that is the style file. So we have in here a SwiftUI.ex. This lives inside. Let me just show the kind of folder structure here. We have a styles folder. This is right next to where you have your live folder, just everything within web. So we have styles, SwiftUI, and then this is where the styling of our application lives. The way that this is actually applied is through the layout we talked about earlier. So inside of our components here, we have our normal layout. So this is just what comes default with a Phoenix application. And then we have a SwiftUI layout. So there's a little bit of configuration here. Most important part is that we are embedding the style sheet, and then we are embedding templates based off of this layout SwiftUI folder. That's what gives us access to the root layout template and the app layout template. So inside of root, this is where the style sheet is embedded, as well as some CSRF token stuff that we can just kind of ignore for now. And this is where that actual styling gets made available, so that when we define this style sheet, that's going to be available to us.
Change.
Come on, Ryan.
No, we have to asynchronously fetch the sheets. There's a good reason for it. The embedding of the style sheets within the template doesn't scale well, and so this way it is today, but in about a week it's going to change. Sorry.
I just want everyone to appreciate why my job is hard. I educate on sand, but I do have to say I've loved using these patterns. I really like the direction that things have been headed, so it's been such a joy to see things constantly progressing and improving, and so that really has been so cool. One of our lead developers, Carson, is the person who I think kind of touches this code the most. He is just absolutely incredible, brilliant mind, and so new things are constantly being added. New improvements, I should say, are constantly being added. Okay, so that is how things are going to glue together. For this workshop, there are only two files you actually need to care about. This file right here, where you're going to define all of your style sheets, and then the Neeks template file. You do not need to modify any other files within the application. Those are the only two that are going to matter for the exercises. That's where most of the logic is going to live. Any questions about that? Okay, all right. Moving on here. So how do we read SwiftUI docs? So in SwiftUI, you'll see examples like this. So this is a view. It's one of the building blocks for building our native UIs. It's like a function, and in this case, it's taking this hello SwiftUI argument. And the way we represent that is as a kind of reminiscent of an HTML tag, where we have our text and then the content inside of it. So whenever you see views within some SwiftUI code, the exercises are going to show you different views. This is how you can translate one view to another. So you can look back at this and use it as reference whenever you see a view inside of a SwiftUI example. Modifiers are the things that modify and change our views. So they can apply styling, but they're actually much more expansive than that. They can also do things like, add animation and gestures and framing. And so they're kind of this very powerful tool within SwiftUI. And the way we represent them is through LiveView Native style sheets. So the sheet sigil that we saw earlier, this is an example from that. So we can see we can essentially chain modifiers together using this kind of dot syntax in SwiftUI. So you can apply many different modifiers to something. And in LiveView Native, we take those same modifiers, we omit the dot beforehand. So it's just a bunch of functions being called one after the other. Otherwise, the syntax remains kind of the same. We're gonna go over some edge cases to that. But we define the name of our class. So in this case, we have color blue. We have this do end block. We have our modifiers inside of it, omitting the dot. And then we can apply that class inside of the template. So we can say class color blue, and now the text would be blue. So just to show you what that looks like in our application here, in the text, I'm going to give it a class color blue. And then in our style here, we're going to go color blue. Do end or ground style. Ooh, Carson added some autocomplete. That's lovely. Blue. And now running the native application, we can see live updating as well. So it auto reloaded for us. We now have blue text.
I want to point out too that for anyone that has done actual like iOS development before, like just live reload alone is one of the things that people have really appreciated, because having to stop and restart the simulator is sometimes like a 2-minute process.
Yep. Yeah, having done native development myself with React Native for a couple of years, I can definitely appreciate how nice it is that these things just update, because I had that exact issue. And then the simulator wouldn't restart, the shaking, kind of the number of times I'm just shaking my phone as a React Native developer is I'm pretty sure that's how I developed carpal tunnel. So hugely, hugely beneficial. Okay, back to our slides here. And if anyone has questions, please just go ahead and raise your hand or ask them in the chat. If anyone has any technical difficulties with setting up the Xcode stuff, by the way, please post that in the chat. While we have Brian, he can kind of help asynchronously. And when Brian has to go, then I will also do my best, but we're also going to have a pause point where we can debug these issues.
People are pointing out how slow Xcode is, which...
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, we all agree. It can be troublesome. That is the pain of iOS development in general, unfortunately. Okay. My slide is not moving. Why are you not moving? There we go. Okay, we have another concept called attributes in SwiftUI. So attributes are more akin to arguments in a function, whereas modifiers are more like functions you call on your view that modify and change it. And so these will set up some kind of initializing pieces of data for the view that you're creating. It can be a little bit fuzzy, like what is a modifier and what is an attribute. But in general, another kind of rule of thumb is that attributes will only affect the view that they're being applied to, whereas modifiers can propagate to their children. So if you change like a font, for example, on a view, that font modifier will affect any child views as well. You'll also sometimes see unnamed attributes in SwiftUI. So here we have an example with an image view that's given a turtle rock attribute. These are made unnamed just as syntax sugar. You have the ability to provide them with a name. So I don't think I have it in my slide here, but it would just have name : turtle rock. I can show an example of that if we need. And the way that we provide that in LiveView Native is by passing in name as an attribute to the element. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. Any questions about attributes and how those work? You're going to see some examples in the exercise that will have attributes within it. Oh, the one thing I wanted to mention, that's why I was pausing for a moment there. We've included an image inside of the native application already for you. That's part of the asset catalog. The asset catalog is a way of managing assets on the native side of things. It's not really within the scope of this workshop, so we've just given you one called Turtle Rock. If there's time, I'm happy to go into that, but we're just going to know that we have an image called Turtle Rock, and we're not going to worry too much about why we have that image, just for the sake of brevity and time. Okay. Really briefly, just wanted to show what SwiftUI documentation looks like, because the goal is to be able to use Apple's existing documentation to understand views from SwiftUI and then convert them into LiveView Native syntax. So this is just showing you what the text view looks like on the Apple documentation. There's a modifier that you could find on this page called foreground style. This is the one that we just used. This is where we can see the unnamed attribute. So this little underscore indicates that you don't have to provide it with a name, the way that we saw alignment leading on the VStack. So it's optional. But if you want, you absolutely can pass it in through the name, and that's kind of how we approach these things in LiveView Native. And if you wanted to know what all the different colors are within that page, just want to highlight it here. You can see the color struct. And so this is why we have access to things like dot blue and dot red. What SwiftUI can kind of do is use something called implicit member expression. I hope I got that acronym right, or that term right. And what it does is it takes the expected type, and then when you use dot notation, it goes, well, this is supposed to be a color. You don't need to tell me color dot red. If you just tell me dot red, I'm pretty sure I can figure out what to access in that data. So we could use dot black, blue, dot brown, etc.
Swift can do that because Swift is a strongly typed language. It knows what type each value is supposed to be. So it knows what a class or a struct it's supposed to implicitly be pulling members from.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay. I've already kind of gone over all of these things here. So this is just really highlighting what we were looking at before, talking about that implicit member expression. So I'm going to move on. Perfect. We're now at the exercise phase of things. So you're armed with a tool to convert views, attributes, and modifiers. That's all you should need for the first exercise here. So I'm going to ask everyone to open up their code editor, go to exercise1.md, and this is the exercise. You're going to convert the following SwiftUI code into a LiveView Native template. And this is where things that you thought, oh yeah, that totally makes sense, you'll suddenly go, oh, nope, I don't quite actually get this, and that's totally fine. Ask questions, we'll talk about it. And you're going to take these views and modifiers here, and you're going to turn them into a template using the patterns we just established. I recommend you reference the slides so that you can go back and see how each thing is done. And we're going to take some time for this. But before that, we're probably going to need to help people debug their environment. So have all of the downloads finished?
I believe mine has, but I'm just sitting on this index. I mean, it doesn't look like it's moving.
Do you have a press bar or numbers?
Byron, if you could share your screen real quick, there may be a way for us to kind of circumvent that, but I just want to see what state it's in.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, just digging around a little bit, I noticed that the project file is actually pinned to 14, not 15. So I just changed that.
I think it can run before the indexing completes.
Try, okay, so yeah, so if everyone looks at Byron's, press the play button on the upper left-hand corner. This could force it to compile and may work around that indexing issue. So now on the left-hand side, what you're going to see are these three red X's, the circle under packages and such. So because Swift does not have trusted package management system, you have to trust and enable. So click on the first one, and you'll get a pop-up. And we can't see it because you're just sharing the app, but you would see, everyone else would see. So what Byron is seeing is a little modal dialog that says like trust and enable, and you have to click one of those and then click trust and enable for each of those. There is discussion on having Apple launch like an actual hosted package management system that would hopefully do away with this at some point. But from what I understand, this is the case for all third-party libraries, that regardless whether or not they're LiveView Native Dockered ones or whatever, you always have to do trust and enable. It's just kind of like when you download an app from outside the App Store. You have to, I think it's also trust and enable for that. So if you do trust and enable for each 3 of those, and then you hit the play button again, it should start the build process. And I think that will get you around that indexing issue.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like it's moving forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Ostap, how's yours going?
Yeah, it's running. I also had the same red warning that I had to click and accept.
Perfect. Okay. Elena's was already running. Who else? Who is actively participating in the workshop and has it running other than Ostap, Elena, and Byron? Nicholas? Okay. Okay. Who is actively participating in the workshop and does not have it running? Give us a raised hand. Does that mean that everyone who is actively participating has it, and we just have a lot of either the environment doesn't work or preferring fly on the wall? That is totally fine. I just want to make sure that anyone who does want to actively participate in the workshop today has what they need to do so, because it is going to be a very hands-on, this is we are going to walk through and complete exercises, and there will be time spent purely just working on an exercise. Is there anyone who would like to participate but feels like maybe they fell a step behind or just aren't sure about getting their environment set up that wants to speak up now so we can get them up to speed? Okay.
I'm sorry, Brooklyn. Could you repeat like where this exercise 1 code belongs to? It's a Unix file or in the style file? Sorry.
So there's yes. So both will belong in the template and the style file. So let me just show my screen here. I'm going to walk through how you would get started at the beginning of this, just so we have an idea of how to start converting this. So looking at exercise 1 here, the template code belongs in our Nix file. The style code belongs in the style file. And the first thing we see is a VStack. So I'm going to ignore everything else. I'm just going to think about this. Oh, that's kind of unhelpful. Let's paste this over here just so we can kind of ignore it for a little bit. Okay, so we're just going to think about this VStack. This is a technique, by the way, whenever you're working on a problem, Elena will have heard me say this before, solve the easier problem. So if you're ever taking on a problem and it feels like it's just too large to kind of tackle all at once, see if you can find an easier version of the problem that you can solve. And this is how you get unblocked whenever you're working on anything that just feels overwhelming and big. And so we're just going to worry about this code here. We want to create a VStack. So that's a view. It has alignment, so that's an attribute, and it has padding, so that's a modifier. So looking at our Nix file first, that's not the right Nix file. Looking at our Nix file first, we have a VStack that we want to create. So let's start with a empty template. How can I take that VStack view and turn it into LiveView Native template syntax? If anyone wants to raise their hand or just go ahead and give an idea, what do we think? How do we take that VStack view and convert it into the native template syntax. I'll put it side by side so we can see everything all at once here. This, those others, exercise 1, and boom. Nikolai, if people post in the chat, can you read it out for me?
In the chat, it's fine. Like Camel said, is trying to have it running. Just Brian has his hands raised.
Oh, Brian, did you want to say something, Brian?
I'm sorry, I was just trolling you. I was going to say I know how to do it, but
Yeah,
shouldn't be the one time.
So we're good.
It's very
We're
fair.
good.
I'd be upset if you didn't know how. That'd be concerning. So let's look at our example. If no one has the answer here, let's look at our documentation again, our slide rather. So the first part is the view. So we can see when we have a view like this, text with some content inside of it, we represent it as an HTML element. So we take the name of it and we make an HTML element with the same name. So in our example in the code here, we have our view, and the view's name is VStack. So how might I write this as an HTML element?
There is a question from Camille. Based on the documentation, will this be the tag VStack or something else? I guess it's.
I think you have the right idea. There's a small typo in terms of the casing that I just want to confirm. It will match the casing. So there's no change in uppercase or lowercase. It will have the exact same casing. Yeah,
And that's
so
going to be
exactly
true of attributes as well. So any attributes for the SwiftUI structs that are camel cased will also be camel cased in the element, in the tag itself too.
Okay. So did anyone not understand Camille's suggestion? Camille's suggesting we could write an element with less than symbol VStack or something like that. Does anyone want clarification on what that means before we write it down? Yeah, that's exactly right, Camille. Okay, so putting that into our code here, we have VStack. And then we make our closing tag. Perfect. Okay. Next, let's think about the attribute. So we've finished the view. Now we have this attribute alignment leading. And people who are not able to actually run the simulator, you can absolutely get involved in this too. This is kind of a collaborative coding exercise, so it's making it a bit more available for those who don't have the simulators. So if you have ideas, how can we write this attribute? We're testing our knowledge. It's easy to passively absorb information, and then we realize, oh, I didn't actually get that, when we're actually challenged on it. So how do we write this attribute? Feel free to speak up, or if you want to post in the chat, that is totally fine.
Brooke, I'm seeing your Chrome, but I'm not seeing your
Oh,
editor.
sorry.
That'll help.
Here, let me swap the
I think
presentation view. Look at you.
Yeah, I think you're going back to look at the chat, right?
That's absolutely correct. There you go. Now you can see this, and I can still look at everyone. So if we wanted to figure this out, and I want people to kind of vocalize, let's get active. If we wanted to figure this out, where do we think we can find this information? Where should we be looking right now?
Okay, I'm going to make one more suggestion. I just for the future workshops, not right now, but you could probably create like a second screen and share that's not having a second monitor, but a second screen, because sharing the app, it's your VS Code itself. Now you're going to have to unshare and then reshare.
Yeah, if I want to show the Google slide, yeah, it's a little bit.
Well, no, but also the simulator. The simulator is a separate app. So you can create a separate workspace and then just share that individual workspace, but not right now.
Cool. Appreciate the feedback. Byron?
I mean, I'm just looking in the README. There's a link to the hex docs for LiveView Native, and He's giving me some example SwiftUI VStack code.
We also have the Google Slides. The Google slide I shared is where you can find all of this information to refer back to. So if you check out the, if I hit this button, oh no, that just takes me there. Okay. Let me go back to my full screen situation here. So if we have a look at the Google slide, we saw views. These are modifiers. These are attributes. Okay, so what do we see? This has a pretty one-to-one example, so we should be able to figure it out from here.
Brooklyn, I have some feedback. Is you know, I'm a Phoenix guy. I'm not a Swift guy. Right? So it's kind of like I'm coming to this speaking English, and I want to learn how to, you know, use this tool to create something in French. And and what I'm seeing here is, well, here's the version in German, and we're going to translate that into French. Like, I don't speak SwiftUI, so it's kind of like you're showing me two different things that I don't understand yet.
Fair. So the goal of this is to be able to refer to things like the SwiftUI documentation, which most of the information you find out there on the internet is going to be in SwiftUI syntax. So even if we don't fully understand, like, what is an attribute, what is a modifier, that's okay. What we need right now is to be able to understand the dictionary. We need to understand our Google Translate, because once we can understand our Google Translate, great. Now we can take examples from the internet, we can take tutorials from the internet, and we can put them in our own language. And with that, now we have the ability to learn from existing materials.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
It has been suggested that we look into a code gen where we can take like an existing SwiftUI view and kind of just output the Neeks template. That's something that I've been toying with, but it would be much further down the line, like, you know, definitely after 0.3 is launched.
So how do we think we apply this this attribute now? So we're taking this example from earlier. By the way, part of the motivation for how this workshop works as well is there's actually a bunch of SwiftUI tutorials. I should show, if I have the link. Let's see. That's not it. I think I actually have it linked in the description here. Yes. So part of the reason we've created this workshop this way is that it follows pretty much one-to-one the existing SwiftUI tutorials. Brian is actually going through and creating workshops for each of these and has been presenting some of them internally as a way of proving that everything we can do within the SwiftUI tutorials, we can do within LiveView Native. And so it's following this kind of similar format. I've just turned it less into a, okay, write this, and more into a, okay, here's the concept. How are you going to then apply that concept to accomplish this task? I don't know if I'm sharing the thing that I hope I'm sharing. Am I sharing the whole thing? Did everyone see the tutorial I just put up on the screen, or are we still looking at my slides?
I'm seeing slides.
Okay, let me show that one more time. Sorry about that. This is what I was looking at. So there's SwiftUI tutorials, creating and combining views. This is largely based off of these tutorials. And this workshop goes through kind of the initial tutorials, just presenting it in a slightly different format. Okay. So how do we add this this attribute here? We've seen a one-to-one example. Someone should be able to tell me how can we add this alignment attribute onto this VStack.
Did you? I mean, yeah.
It's just an XML attribute.
Yeah.
Yep, it's just an HTML attribute. That's exactly right. Sorry, Byron, did you have a question?
No. I think I was going to say the same thing.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is changing the alignment of the VStack. So I should, to kind of get to what Brian was, or sorry, not Brian, Byron was mentioning earlier, we might want to understand a bit about what are these views. What is a VStack? So this is the learning curve to LiveView Native. Everything else in LiveView Native is Phoenix and LiveView. So we have things like Phoenix Click, all of our event handlers. So all of the logical side of things is built using the same LiveView patterns. The one portion of it that is going to be some learning curve to it is how do we build out the native template? And so that is going to require some learning on SwiftUI. And this is kind of to give you those fundamental building blocks for SwiftUI, and then how do you convert that to LiveView Native syntax? So a V stack and an H stack are ways of organizing our content. So it's kind of like how Flex works in the web, where you would have like flex direction column or flex direction row, where you're organizing all of your content within a container. So we have horizontal stack, H stack, and vertical stack, V stack. So this is the container that wraps our content and makes it flow downwards on the page. We're looking at a very isolated piece of it. It's going to have all the other views and modifiers and things within it. But right now we're just looking at the container. So we've already said we have the attributes. So that would be alignment equals, if I can spell, leading. Perfect. Okay, and now we have a modifier, padding. So how can we take this modifier, padding, and convert it into LiveView Native syntax? We're going to need a style sheet, and then we're going to need something on the template. So let's start with the template. If we want to apply some styles, what do we need in our template? Bring us back to our example here with modifiers. What do we need in our template? Class? I heard class. Perfect. That's exactly right. Yeah. What else do we need? So not in the template. What else are we going to need to actually define the modifiers?
Style sheet.
That's right. Perfect. So we can come up with an arbitrary name for our class. There's not really a right or a wrong here. Why don't we just call it padding, just for the sake of simplicity? And then within our style, we can get rid of our color blue because we're no longer using that. What do we write here? Someone tell me what to write. Let's see, who hasn't? Cleaver, do you want to tell me what to write?
I've been poking around with my Xcode 14.
That is totally understandable. That is totally understandable. I'd prefer if someone jumps in, but I am a teacher and I will play the, if you don't jump in, I'll call on you game. I prefer if people jump in though, because then I don't catch people off guard.
I forgot the syntax, sorry.
That is totally fine. You don't need
So
to
something like
apologize.
padding do, right?
Yep. So I heard you said, can you say that one more time, Camille?
Padding do, I think, block.
Yep.
And
we put that inside of a string. So padding do.
and I guess the CSS definition of this, or Swift definition, padding.
Yeah. With the parentheses that we need to.
Perfect.
There is no
right.
attribute.
So it's the exact same. The only thing we omit is the dot.
Yeah.
That's right. Perfect. Okay. So continuing on. Because we have so many people who aren't able to get this running, we only really have 4 people who have all of this working. I think it's going to be better if we run this as a group coding exercise rather than as a break up into groups completely exercise, because that would only benefit 4 people. Whereas if we run this as a group coding exercise, it's going to benefit the entire group. So we're thinking on our feet here. We're going to do this more as a group code. And so next part to add, we have our text turtle rock. We've already seen a kind of an example of that. We already have our example of how to make a VStack work, but we haven't had views nested within each other. So does anyone have a guess on how we can write this bit of SwiftUI code that's going to give us our turtle rock text?
It's just a text tag?
Yep, perfect. Text, and then the content, turtle rock. Perfect. Now this has a modifier. So we already know to apply a modifier, we give it a class.
Title.
Yep. Maybe we can call it title. Perfect. And now how are we going to define this class?
The style sheet.
Perfect. Yeah. All right. Now it's always the ball gets rolling. It's always a little bit difficult at first, but now people are starting to see the patterns. That's perfect. So what do we want to call this? We've already given a name. So what am I going to write between these two quotes?
Let's go with title. I think.
Title.
Font.
Perfect, right? It has to
Font?
match.
No.
So if we call this something else, it would not match, right? So in this template, we said class is title. That means that our style has to be named title. If I called it cool title, that's not going to match, right? So this now has to be named title. Perfect. Okay, and what is our modifier going to be?
Put font.
And dot title within the parentheses.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Let's have a look and see how this is shaping up. Perfect. We have some text. It says Turtle Rocket centered on the page. Beautiful. All right. Keeping on. Next, we have this H stack. It's going to have some other content inside of it. It doesn't appear to have any attributes.
Hey, before we go on, the dot title, I don't understand what that did.
Great question. Thank you for asking that. So earlier, we saw, can everyone see my slides?
Yep.
Earlier, we talked a little bit about implicit member expression. Let me pull back to our slide that had that here. Yeah. So it's an abbreviated way of accessing a member of a type. So SwiftUI is a strongly typed language, and we have a modifier. In this case, the modifier is font. This is showing one foreground style, but the modifier is font. Font knows that it's going to take a font, right? So there's a struct. I think the name of it is font. It might be called something else, but it doesn't really matter. Swift knows what it's expecting, and so we are accessing a member of that type. So when we go dot title, it's actually doing something like font.title. I can double check the actual name of the struct, but that's essentially what's happening here. That's why we have access to dot title. I think the next one is dot subheadline. All of these are coming from something defined in SwiftUI. If it's useful, we can actually check out the documentation. So let's have a look at this, because I think this is a great question and worth exploring.
Is it
Yeah,
similar?
I wasn't sure if we were defining that. Obviously, we're doing the connection, but you're saying, if I could replay what I heard, is that SwiftUI already has a thing called font.title, and we're just connecting the dots there.
That's exactly right. It already has one. And so we can see, I've gone to the definition of font, and we can see that there's this font type here. And going into this, we can see it has a bunch of different members defined. So it has title, large title, extra large title, title 3, headline. So these are all a bunch of different fonts that we have access to. And that's what we're accessing.
So if you change it to large title, we'll see it get bigger.
Exactly. So large, how is it spelled again? Large title, camel case.
Wait,
Oh, sorry, I put that in the wrong place.
Okay.
Ignore me. Ignore me. Apologies for that confusion. Yep. So now we can see it's a little bit bigger. Everyone can see my simulator here, right?
Yep.
Perfect. If we pick, let's see. Oh, giving you access to all my private information. Extra large title 2. Let's try that. See if it works.
So it's a bit similar to atoms in Elixir.
It's a little bit more similar to, I think I want to say yes, but I want to add to that and say it's a little bit more similar to like dot notation on a map, where you're like map dot key. It's a little bit more similar to that. It's just, imagine we could infer what type of map it was, and we could just give it the key. And we didn't need to go map.key, we could just go .key. So I don't want to, it's not quite the same thing, so I don't want to create too much of a parallel there. but it is a key value data structure. So it's like a map. Okay. Apparently extra large title 2 is tiny. That's bizarre. Who knows why that happens? Okay, we'll set this back to title. Okay, continuing on forward. Next we have our H stack. We've already done something like this before. So what am I going to write here?
Another tag.
Perfect. Okay. This does not have any modifiers, doesn't have any attributes, so that's enough. We're now creating the children inside of it. So we have text, Joshua Tree National Park. Looks like it has a font modifier. We have a spacer, and then some more text, California. So let's write this first one here. What am I going to write next?
Text attribute.
Elena,
I will have to define a new modifier.
Yes, we're going to have to define a new modifier. That's exactly right. Did I hear you say write a text element?
Yep.
Perfect. Text, and Joshua Tree National Park. Perfect. Okay. Elena, can I ask you to take it from here? If you don't mind me calling on you. I just want to make sure you get a chance to jump in here.
Sure, but I don't know what. Would it be? Are you adding like an attribute to the text?
Yeah. So we're adding in this font subheadline. So this is the part that we're focused on next.
So would it be font equals subheadline?
Really, really close. So the modifiers are going to be added through the class. So you asked, are we adding an attribute? You were totally correct about that. The attribute we're adding isn't font. The attribute that we're adding is class. And then we give it some value. This part's totally arbitrary. So what's something that you think is good, or a good name, or a cool name, or a funny name, or something appropriate?
What we're trying to describe the.
We're trying to describe it, that it's a sub headline.
Maybe, I mean, I would just use probably subheadline or subhead.
Yep. That's exactly what I would do too. Subheadline. Keep it simple. Okay, so where do we go if we want to now define the modifiers for this class?
Sorry, Brooklyn. Can I ask a question? Like, is this general pattern that we just name the styles exactly the same as they are named in Swift?
I'm going to show you another pattern of doing it here. Right now, these are completely arbitrary. So you can decide how you want to name your styles. If you have patterns that you implement, those are up to you. I'm going to show you a different way of, we're going to refactor this code if we have time and show a different way of doing this after. But this is perfectly good as a pattern for now. But if I wanted to call it who's a what's it, that would be fine too. Probably not a great naming scheme, but these names do not matter. I don't want anyone to think there's a correlation here. We could call this whatever we want. So great question.
So typically when you're referring to a font, I mean, in a word editor or something, you would specify the name of the font, right? I mean, so the misleading part for me is like, well, is subheadline like a kind of a font, or what is exactly it is? And is there a, like, when you're defining this in your style sheet, right? You would be referring to the font modifier. You would make like a Swift call, like dot font.
Yep. So that is a 100% valid criticism of the current pattern. We're going to continue with it just so that we can forge progress ahead. And then we can circle back and have a discussion around maybe we want to refactor this. I'm actually going to show something called dynamic classes that will kind of refactor our code, but totally valid. Right now, I just want to know how do we get this to work? So what is our next step? We've defined this class here, but we need to define it somewhere else. So where do we go?
The style sheet.
Exactly right. Perfect. So what do I have to write in our brackets?
Subheadline.
Perfect. And what are we going to put as our modifier?
Font dot subheadline.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay, so that should have gotten it to work. So let's have a look at our simulator. Great. We have two pieces of text. They are of different sizes. Wonderful. We now have a spacer.
I have a question.
So I guess I guess what I was trying to understand has been answered. The dot font dot subheadline call in the style sheet, right, that you have right now.
Yep.
Right, that is basically saying that this piece of text is going to be rendered as a subheadline, right? So subheadline is kind of the the modifier, right?
Yes. Well, sorry. Subheadline is not the modifier. Font is the modifier. Subheadline is the value.
Right. It's a value to the function called font. Is that how you read it, or what's the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's using dot chaining. So we have a text
Yeah.
kind of function here, and then we go dot font, and that's mutating our text,
Right.
and it's changing the font of it. And then the value is dot subheadline, which is our implicit
Right.
member access. It's going font dot subheadline.
Okay.
So this is our smaller one, and this is our bigger one. Yeah.
I have a question.
I heard someone else say they have a question. Go ahead.
Yep. So do we have to use style sheets and modifiers because there is no way to set it as an attribute, or do we use it because of organizational purposes, or
So-
what's the code structure?
Really great question. Thank you for asking it. So there was a previous pattern in LiveView Native 0.2 where modifiers were all written in line. So you would define an attribute. I think it was just modifiers equals, and then you would use piping with all of the modifiers. It was a little bit more akin to like Tailwind or something like that, where all of your styles are in line. And we moved away from that pattern to defining a global style sheet and kind of defining all of our styles up front. There's a variety of reasons for that. As I understand it, one of the main reasons for doing that is performance. So previously, every time a page changed, you would have to send over all of your styling code as well. And that could potentially be quite expensive. And so with this, we're able to send the style sheet over as soon as the app makes its connection. So it's sent with the root, which doesn't need to be resent every time there's a new socket connection or anything like that. And so part of it is the kind of performance benefits that you get from it. And then the other part of it is the organizational benefits of having it mirror the way that CSS works. There's even talk of doing things like creating a style sheet library that would have a bunch of styles defined out of the box so that people wouldn't need to even know the modifiers in SwiftUI, and they would just have some styles that they can apply, and that would reduce the amount of kind of learning overhead. Because right now, there's really no getting around the need to learn some SwiftUI. So having something like a style library is definitely an interesting idea, and something that this would enable is the ability to define a bunch of predefined classes and then have them available in your application. So did that answer the question, or did you have a follow-up?
Yep, I understood it. So it's to load the styles once and not have it reload on each update.
Yeah, that was one of the primary motivations for it. Okay. I think we've seen the pattern. So the pattern so far is if we see a view, we render it as an HTML tag. If we see a modifier, we give it a class and we define it in our style sheet. If we see a attribute, we make it an HTML attribute and it has the same name as whatever the kind of name of the attribute is here, and then the same value but as a string for whatever the value is here. So there's 3 patterns we should be trying to identify right now. And just kind of for the sake of making sure we have time to cover some of the other content I want to get to, I'm going to race us a little bit to the end just because we've already done this a couple times. And I'm going to talk about some other concepts. So here we have our spacer. That's a view. So we're going to make that an element called spacer. We can make this self-closing. That's perfectly fine. Or we could have done it so it had a closing tag. Next, we have our California text. It says California. And the cool thing is we've actually already defined this class for subheadline. So we can just reapply it and it works. Boom. So we have gotten to the working portion of exercise 1. We're now at a place we can return to our slides and learn some new information here. So any questions about what we did to build out exercise 1? Ashley? Well, first I'll ask any questions, and then I'll ask a follow-up to that.
I have a side question.
Sorry. Okay, so I want to understand that since we are using this class attribute as a piggyback mechanism to really render font, calling the modifier and passing a value essentially to it, right? Is there a better pattern, like maybe because this is a Nix, this is not even HTML, right? So it's not that you cannot pass in a custom attribute. Since we are going to use font anyways, it won't like font attribute be easy enough to pass as an attribute to the the tag, right? I mean itself. Like if you go back to the code for a second, right? I think right, we are passing this subheadline, right?
Right. So if instead of doing something like it would be font.
Yeah, font equal to subheadline.
Okay.
Or this or
answer for why that pattern won't scale. When we talk about some of the other, because we've seen some kind of more straightforward, but there are some patterns in SwiftUI that just don't play nice with this idea of defining everything as an attribute. That also relates to the performance conversation we had earlier. So my other answer to that question would be performance would be a concern if we're defining everything in line. But there's also some limitations to kind of this way of defining things that we're going to run into as well as part of the motivation for Stylesheets. So I'll try to call that out just so that we can. Well, this is a really interesting conversation. I want to continue it, but I want to continue it with a little bit more context that I think will help.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a side question because I do not have the color syntaxing like you do. So I suspect you may have an extension in VS Code to do that. Do you?
Yes. I was hoping someone would ask that. So if you're using Visual Studio Code, you can look up LiveView Native in your extensions panel, and it will not come up. Why didn't it come up? One sec. There we go. Sorry, I put a space between LiveView. If you look up LiveView with no space, native, we have a LiveView Native extension, so you absolutely can add this to your Visual Studio Code, and that will add this nice syntax highlighting.
Awesome.
Perfect. Okay. How confident, so I'm going to give everyone a mirror view for a second here because I have to look at everyone for a second. How confident, if we can post in the chat 1 to 5, how confident are we feeling about that pattern of views turn into HTML elements, attributes turn into HTML attributes, modifiers turn into a class on my element, and something defined in my style sheet? 1 to 5, how are we feeling on that? Everyone put it. Feeling 1, feeling 3, feeling 5. The other numbers are valid choices as well. I don't know why I decided to highlight those specific. Here's the thing: if you go for 4, you know, everyone knows it's 1, 3, and 5. Everything else is cowardice. You're either feeling good, feeling bad, or feeling okay. So if everyone can go ahead and post how you're feeling in the chat. This is a judgment-free zone. This is not so that we can point and laugh, or even so that we can praise people. It is purely so I have an idea of how is this information landing. If we're feeling really confident, great, I can move on. But no one needs to hear me just say
your
words
chat is
for 2
not
hours.
updating on the screen.
Sorry, go ahead, Ostap.
I think your chat is not updating on the screen. There are some new messages.
Oh, well, that's why. I'm like, man, like I'm having such a hard time getting engagement on this one. Thank you. Okay, 544. Byron isn't. Are you saying? Is that okay? There's a few things this could be. Either Byron's an 11, but I think Byron is more of a smart than this. I'm pretty sure Byron is binarying for us right now.
That was a Spinal Tap reference, guys. Come on.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought you were saying you were a 3.
No, I said I was a 4 earlier, and then I was trying to be funny.
I thought it was very funny, but for the wrong reasons. Yeah, Camille agrees with me. Okay, you're in a software group, Byron. Everyone knows 11 is 3. Yeah, perfect. Okay, all right. Seems like we're Cleaver is pi, so I think we're mostly okay. And this is recorded, so if anyone needs to kind of rewatch, or if they go through the exercises on their own time, learning does not occur at the same pace, and that is a totally okay thing. So if anyone is feeling confused, that's totally fine. We're covering quite a lot of information here. Okay, so back to my slides. How are we doing for time, by the way? Is it, I can't remember if we're stopping at 8 or 8:20.
I think 8:20. We started a bit late, so.
Okay.
But anyone, feel free to drop anytime you need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to drop Brooklyn. This is really good. Great way to get me going on this. It's something I've been wanting to learn, so I'm definitely gonna go through the rest of the exercises. But really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Byron. Much appreciated. Let me know if you have any questions in the future. Happy to help. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about a couple of kind of advanced patterns that we have here. We have about 40 minutes, so I'm going to give myself, well, I think probably the rest of this is probably going to be mostly talking, and I might go back and kind of write some examples, but we're probably not going to have time for the exercise, and that's okay. So we have the ability to, if anyone has seen kind of pattern matching on a string, that's the syntax that we're looking at here. So first thing to call out is our little concat symbol. So this is saying we're defining a class called frame_h. Everything after the string frame_h is going to be bound to our height, our height variable. That is then being passed in. So we have a frame modifier. There's a named argument called height, and then the value is being interpolated. So if you've ever seen like string interpolation, this is the same type of syntax. We need to tell the modifier, hey, this value, this is not like a SwiftUI thing. This is a LiveView Native Elixir thing. So we're injecting the value into the modifier. You might have seen something kind of similar in the Ecto library if you've ever worked with that, where they have the pin operator whenever you need to pass in a variable to part of their DSL, domain-specific language. If you haven't seen that, that's just extra confusing, so don't worry about any of the words I just said. But sometimes learning by analogy can be helpful. This is going to allow us to define classes that are reusable. So in this one, we're making a frame_h that we can give any height, and now this is reusable throughout our application. So this comes back to what we had before, where we had, there's some comments over, I'm not sure I like calling it title or subheadline. It doesn't really tell me much about the specific font or the specific modifier that we're using. And so what we can do, we can actually make a generic dynamic class. So I'm going to add to all of our classes font. And then in our style sheet, we're going to define a dynamic class. So we see font : and then everything after here is going to be the font given. And then within it, we can have our modifier. So the modifier is font. And then how do I put the value inside of here? What am I going to write inside of these brackets? I'll show the slide again. I'll kind of waver back and forth so we can see. Here's our example. You give it 5 seconds. It's like a burger menu where you get it for 5 seconds. If you don't figure out what it is, it'll rotate to something else and you have to wait. Yeah, it's been about 5. And here's what we have. So we want to put the font in here. How are we going to put that value in?
Just
Here's
the
what we
word
have.
font?
Let's try it. So just the word font. So this is what you're intending, right?
With the curly braces around to interpolate.
Okay. We'll put our curly braces in. Okay. Let's see if it works. Doesn't look like it's working.
Did we?
Something is
missing. You need to say font colon and then the value, right? So font colon and then the interpolation, right?
Really good guess. Because of what we saw from this example where it's a named attribute, in this case, we can pass it in as an unnamed attribute. So we don't need to give it any more information there, right? We don't need to say like font colon font. But there's something missing here.
The dot.
Need a dot?
Yep, that's exactly right. We're missing the dot. So that's something I expect and anticipate is going to catch, frankly, me. I'm going to miss that like 100 times over the next 5 years. So these are those little syntaxy error bits. So I wanted to show that so that we can all encounter it for ourselves and be prepared for when we experience it. Okay, let's see if it worked. Boom. We have our title. We have our subheadline. Perfect. So that is dynamic classes. Any questions about dynamic classes? This is more of a, I'm going to call it like the sugar on top. It's wonderful that you know how to do this, but if you define all of your classes statically when you start, that's totally fine. None of the exercises require this pattern. It's just a very useful pattern to be aware of. It's the pattern that's going to enable us to eventually create a pre-built style sheet.
Like tailwind.
Exactly. There's been a lot of talk over, hey, could we make like our own tailwind? So this is something we're all really excited about. Okay, next here, this I'm just going to show, and I'm actually not going to demo because this is like the sugar on top of the sugar. We do also have the ability to use a class callback function. So this is called under the hood. This is ultimately what the sheet sigil is doing. So this would allow us to actually have Elixir logic process our class string before applying the modifier. It uses a different sigil called rules, as opposed to our sheet sigil. This goes outside of the sheet sigil, so it would go below it, and it would let us do things like string.split and all kinds of Elixir logic. I just wanted to mention it. It's not going to be too important for us. Okay. Now this is bringing us back to the why can't we just pass in the attributes as attributes? Like why can't everything just be an attribute on the element? And that's because SwiftUI is not the same as HTML, right? We're building native UIs. Native UIs are going to be built differently than the UIs we build on the web. And so there's going to be some patterns that there really aren't equivalents to in the web. So this would be kind of like, this here is a view. So we have a modifier called clip shape, and it accepts an argument, and that argument is a view. This would be like if in our CSS, we had CSS rules sorry, I should say CSS properties whose value was an HTML element, right? This is just not really, there is no real equivalent to something like this inside of CSS. So the way we do this particular pattern the way we do this particular pattern is by using dot notation again. So we can have our clip shape modifier, and if we want to access a view, we just go dot circle for the view. This is showing the dynamic. We could just define this statically. So any questions about that? Clip shape, by the way, it's basically a way of like framing our image. So we're turning the image into a circle by adding this clip shape. Okay. The other pattern that makes it different than something like traditional CSS is named content areas. So there are some modifiers which can take multiple views. So we have this overlay modifier right here. This is basically putting on something on top of the image. And it is wrapping the views in a closure. So that's the curly brackets here. And then the value provided is another view that itself has its own modifiers. So this, again, is just not a pattern that really exists in CSS. It was one of the, I think, trickier things within LiveView Native to account for, because if we're writing something like HTML, we don't really have any equivalent for this. This is, again, this modifier here, it does actually have a named argument. It's just omitting it. So to make it a little bit easier to understand, you can also have this name here called content. This is going to be relevant when I show the LiveView Native example. So the name of the argument provided is content, and that is going to be consistent in pretty much all named content areas in SwiftUI. So this is adding an overlay on top, and the name of that overlay is, or the name of the value provided is content. Okay. So how do we do this in LiveView Native? We do it through the use of a template attribute. So here we have an overlay circle class. It's applying that overlay modifier. It has that same named argument called content. And then instead of providing a view, we provide an atom. This is basically giving it a name for the content area. And then to tell the kind of underlying code, okay, like what is supposed to go there, we use a template attribute on our view. So we have this circle view, it has a template attribute, and the value for that template attribute matches the name of the atom. And that's how these two things communicate with each other. That's how when we apply this class, it knows, hey, I'm supposed to have an overlay modifier, and I'm looking for something with the circle template attribute, and I'm going to take that element and I'm going to place it inside of this overlay. That's how this talks to each other. That's how this works under the hood. So any questions about that? Might be a little bit kind of confusing right now. We're going to see this in actual practice in a moment. And so that is going to make this a bit more practical, and we'll see it kind of built up. So let's get practical. Moving on to exercise 2. I recommend, by the way, for everyone who does have their system working, to go through and complete these exercises on your own and see that you actually have the ability to walk through these without kind of the support of group. So here is the SwiftUI code that we're going to convert. This is creating an image using that turtle rock image we talked about before. It is going to be in the shape of a circle. And then overlaid on top of that image, there's going to be this white circular border. And then there's also going to be a shadow kind of behind all of that. And that's going to look like what we have in our simulator example here. So that's our goal. So we still have the exact same patterns we had before, where we take our view, we convert it into a tag, we take our attribute, we make it an HTML attribute, and we take our modifier, we make it a class. We now have 2 more patterns. We have the pattern where we provide a view. Let me click on this. Where we provide a view by using the dot notation, and where we provide a named content area using the template attribute. So these are the 2 new things that we're learning, and we're continuing to use the 3 patterns that we had before. So this is what we're on the lookout for. So looking at this here, we're going to go into our template. Let me move exercise 2 to be over here so we can see it. We're just going to ignore the code that we had before. We can just go ahead and comment it out. That's totally fine. So starting with something that we've already seen, we have an image view, and it's going to have Turtle Rock. So what should I start writing to put this image into our template?
Well, image tag with turtle lock inside, right?
Let's try. Okay, so we're getting a compilation issue. We can see that in the terminal here, which is, for whatever reason, being very difficult to grab. And if we open up our simulator, we can see we have this issue here. Oh, looks like it's probably because I didn't include a slash. Okay, so we fixed my typo, but we're still not seeing anything.
Yeah.
This is a little bit tricky because you're doing the right thing and you're applying a pattern you saw before, and now you're applying it here. But there's kind of a slight bit of a tricky thing happening here. Does anyone know what it is?
Yeah, for the image, it's actually, that's the name of the image. But
yeah,
you cannot put the text inside the image tag. You need to provide it as an argument to an attribute.
Yeah. That's right. So text is a little bit special, where we make it so that you can put content inside of it, because it's kind of what people on the web expect, right? It would be weird if we had to do something like this. That would be unexpected. And so text is a little bit special, where there's actually an open issue I've raised because I think we should be able to do this. Currently, we can't. But I think most people want to write their text inside of their element. But you're absolutely right with image. This is actually an attribute right here. It's the unnamed attribute that we saw before. And so it needs to be provided by name. So this is going to be a confusing sentence. The name of the attribute is name. So just like that. So you're absolutely going in the right direction, but in this case, it's just a little bit different than the text tag. Boom. Okay, so we have our total ruck image. All right, now how do we apply our clip shape? This is a what? Is this a view, attribute, or modifier? Yes, I heard someone whisper modifier.
A class?
Yes, perfect. So we need a class. Do you want to give me an arbitrary name? There are no wrong answers.
Do we go with like clip shape column circle?
Circle, yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. I like that. Great. So now we have to define our class. Now I'm going to go ahead and say we're not going to do a dynamic class for this.
I was like, okay, let's do that.
So we make that match.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of simplicity here. Now we saw our example from before, but it was a little bit, I'm making you glue the Lego blocks together. So the example we saw before was right here. We saw a clip shape and then dot and shape because this was the dynamic version. I want us to write the static version. So we know that we use dot notation. And we know that the name of the shape in this case is circle.
Does the casing matters in this case?
So I didn't want to call it out because I'm actually going to raise an issue right after this because I think that the fact that this doesn't match the case is a little bit odd, and that might go away because this is the only time where the casing is lowercase, even though the casing of the view is uppercase. Right now, my answer is yes, but we'll see if I can convince Brian to change that. So we have our clip shape here. What am I going to put inside of these brackets?
So dot circle.
Dot circle. That's right. Okay.
Oh,
nice. So that modifier has been applied. We now have a circular image. Perfect. So we're starting to see how these modifiers work, how they actually change our views, and what all of this kind of does. Now we're going to do our overlay and our shadow radius. Now, I think it would be better to define these as 3 different classes. But I do want to call out that we don't have to. If we wanted to, we could absolutely write these modifiers within it, right? So we could do something like shadow radius 7. And we can see that that gives it a shadow. I just don't have any examples in the workshop that show multiple modifiers, so I wanted to take a moment to call out that we can have multiple modifiers grouped within the same class.
Yeah, for example, you will give it a name that is more, the CSS way where you used to put, you choose a class name that is more meaningful and less atomic, versus the other way, which is you provide very atomic utilities and you put them in your class.
Yeah. Actually, is that going to overcomplicate things? I'm debating. All right. Vote from the group. Do we want to do this all as one class, or do we want to do this as multiple modifiers within the same class? I think it could be a little bit more complicated to do it this way, just because there's going to be more code. But really, it's tomato here, and it might be interesting to deviate from the plan.
So Camille said one class. I
One
agree.
class?
I think for the workshop, one class makes sense.
All right, let's do it. Do we want to preserve the name of this, or do we want to change it to something a little bit more domainy?
Coming with a better name.
Now that it has multiple sort of styles, it makes sense to rename it.
I agree. It feels like kind of a lie to say that this is doing clip-shaped circle. So can someone suggest a name, any name? There are no wrong answers.
Emil suggested circle dash image, lowercase.
Great, I'm down for that. Cool. So that is broken things. What do I need to do to fix this?
Go to the template code and set the correct class.
That's right. Circle image, right? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the last modifier we need to apply is this overlay. So I'll get us part of the way there, and I'll say overlay. Now, what are we going to put inside of these brackets? Now, this is another one of those situations where we have an unnamed argument, and we need to figure out what the name of it is.
So it's another circle.
Yeah, so we're going to put in a circle here. I've been a little bit tricky in that I haven't told you what the name of this this argument is, this kind of first argument to the overlay modifier. But it does have a name, and we do need to know the name of it.
Badu put in the chat contents.
Yes, that's right. So we do have to give it content, colon, and now what am I going to write after here?
Dot circle overlay as a way to reference the overlays that we will create later.
Okay, let's try it. So dot circle overlay. Okay. Now there is a syntax error. It's not crashing because it hasn't really. It's just going to. It's kind of like CSS-y, where if it's not applying, it's just not going to worry about it, as opposed to like crashing the moment something is wrong. There is a typo here in a syntax error. Can anyone point it out? There's exactly one character that's incorrect.
Oh, the brackets.
No, I think it should be it's an atom. It should be a colon instead of a dot.
Yeah, that's right. It should be an atom.
But you need to explain why, because I get it's confusing, because before it was dot circle and
yeah. So
it was the template case, right?
Sorry, say that one more time. I didn't hear.
It was the template case you showed on the slides, right?
Yes, yeah. So the difference between these two, this one is actually referencing a view with a dot circle. Again, I think that syntax might change because I don't like that it's lowercase, but it's referencing an actual view. It's saying the clip shape should be a circle view. This one is saying we have an overlay. It has a content area, and we're going to give it the name so that we know what to inject in there later of circle overlay. And the specific of, we could call it overlay. We could call it who's a what's it. The name of this atom doesn't matter. All that matters is that we give it a name, and that name is going to match a view that we're going to define later.
So in the second case,
like referencing something, the other is an actual view.
So in the second case, it's just a name, and first one is the actual thing.
That's right. Yeah. First case, this is the actual thing. This one is just a name. Any questions? Let's finish it up in context here. So now we have this overlay modifier defined. We've said here is where our named content area is going to go. Now we need to define the view that's going to be injected. And so that would go, I'll just give the answer of it will go inside of the image. And it needs to have that template attribute. So what am I going to write inside of this image tag?
Sorry, I still have one question regarding the style sheet.
Absolutely, go for it.
Can you go back to it for a second?
Yep.
So if you look at the Swift code, it looks the same, but on this in our style sheets we use a different syntax for the overlay. What's the difference? Is it just a way of putting the attribute name?
So the motivation for this is we don't have like a nice convenient way of essentially like putting views and modifiers nested within each other, right? So something like this wouldn't really be feasible. It doesn't match the way that CSS works, is the idea. It isn't really how we think on the web. We don't recursively nest like modifiers and views and modifiers and views. When you think of CSS, you think, okay, well, I have some style, it applies to my element. To then have styles that accept elements as arguments is kind of a different type of pattern. It's also, I think there's probably a more technical implementation explanation that Carson would be able to give you in terms of how do you actually parse this out on the LiveView Native side. And so the way of parsing it that we found to be kind of effective is to have a name for this element here. So instead of providing the element directly, because this is not a template, this is not where our views are defined, we give it a name and we say circle overlay. And then we define our element inside of our template. So here is where our circle is going to go. And to essentially tell LiveView Native how where it's supposed to be and like what my words are failing me, but to say, hey, this view is supposed to go in this named content area, we give it the template attribute that matches the name of that area. So we say template equals.
I think I understand the general idea. It was more like, what's the difference? It seems like it's a syntax thing between doing the content attribute and just omitting it, and it will sort of work by itself.
Yeah, this, by the way, is not valid syntax in LiveView Native currently. And the two kind of reasons that this isn't valid LiveView Native syntax, one is what I said before, it's not really the way we think on the web, where we have our views belong in our template and our styles and kind of modifying belongs in our style sheet. So we're trying to take the patterns defined in SwiftUI and repurpose them to what's available on the web. The second reason for it, I think, is technical, where parsing something like this, where you have essentially what is just recursive modifiers that could have views, that could have their own modifiers, that could have their own views, that could have their own modifiers. That type of recursive code, I think, is very I don't want to say impossible, but I will say at the very least extremely difficult to parse. That's my understanding. Again, Carson would be the right person to give the more in-depth technical explanation of that. But does that answer the question?
Sorry, to simplify, it was more like, is it mandatory to type content square bracket? Sorry, yeah, is it mandatory to type content in this case, or can we omit it?
Yeah, in this case, it would be mandatory. Well, I'm pretty sure it's mandatory. Why don't we find out?
Yeah, if you remove content and just...
Let's give it a try. Best way to find out is by doing, right? So we have circle overlay. Let's make sure that this does actually work. So to know that this is going to work, we need our styles. We're kind of low on time, so forgive me. I'm just going to rush to getting this working to kind of have our final example. So rush for time. We want a style for our circle. We're going to, it's pretty much just a border, so stroke. Let's just call it white border. Just for the sake of being able to see this, because if we can't see it, then we won't be able to see if the example works. This has a stroke modifier that takes dot white as the first argument, line width as the second, and the value is 4. And we're going to apply that to our circle. That way we'll be able to see it when it is overlaid on top of our image. I called it white border, right? Yeah. Okay, and let's see. So we can see the white border. Is that coming across on the screen share?
Yep.
Okay, so let's see. The question was, do we have to provide it through the name? Let's find out. Yes, so we do actually have to have the name in this case. That's a valid question, though, is should we have to have that? I'm going to raise that with Carson and see if we can support this syntax. Because if it is just a named attribute, modifiers have the ability to take unnamed attributes in without defining that kind of key value structure. So if we want to be more the way that SwiftUI works, I think we should probably support this syntax. So thank you for bringing up that issue.
Forgive me, just one more comment. If you replace the first character with a dot, would it work in that case?
Like if we did this?
Yep.
No, because this would be saying, hey, it's supposed to reference a an element. Oh, and I'll put the content back just because we know that without that it wouldn't work. So I want it to fail for the right reason. Yeah. This is basically saying, hey, use the circle overlay view. There is no circle overlay view, right? Like there's no view in SwiftUI called circle overlay. This doesn't exist.
Oh, okay. It finally clicked.
Yeah, in fact, it should be
perfect.
The template.
Perfect. Okay, we have about 5 minutes, so now's question time. Would love to encourage everyone to go and complete these exercises on their own. There's also a further reading section, so if you want to keep learning about LiveView Native, you have the ability to do that. This is also a great opportunity if you want to give feedback on what you like, what you don't like. So I'm very curious to hear your questions and comments.
There's a question from Daya.
Hey, so this seems to be that there is a the idea here is that if you come across an example, a sample code of Swift UI, you can easily translate into this Nix template, right? But typically, like when any decent size, company is trying to create an app, they have the, the designers. They design something, let's say in the Figma, and then they give that to the UI expert in this case, and in many of the cases, they start with the UI piece on what is it called, Xcode or in Android Studio, and they go about just creating the UI. And to support that, they have some whatever shell code, right? And they just execute that. And to me, it seems that since Xcode does provide some of that capability to design the UI, you will end up generating the SwiftUI code. So won't there be like a need, or is there a plan maybe to transpile that into Nix? Because then you would be saving a lot of the time, because just put the SwiftUI code and transpile that into Nix.
Yeah, really great question. Something we have discussed internally. I've actually brought up the need for something to take a SwiftUI example and automatically turn it into here's what the Nix template would look like. In theory, that's totally possible. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't. Now, what wouldn't make sense would be to actually write your templates in Xcode and have that just convert into Nix. The reason is, one of the things we didn't see today is that we can use the same event handlers that we do in Phoenix LiveView. So the main benefit of what LiveView Native is doing is bringing LiveView to native. So if we were just writing an Xcode template, we wouldn't have all of our things like the event bindings and those kind of patterns of building out the interactivity. So we still want to represent the views, we still want to represent the templates using a DSL, which is essentially everything we've looked at here. Is to connect these two things together. We built a little DSL that can be converted into Xcode, and it allows us to build LiveView applications and have them run on native. So we wouldn't want to build it in Xcode, but I really think a tool like that could be quite educational.
Yeah, no, I mean, you won't, but a designer who does not understand Elixir or Heeks or any other, things, they would start from, that step, and then we would need to, convert that into Nix, right? But just to save the time, a transpiler will be very, very helpful.
I agree.
Yeah, and I just like one last thing that I wanted to just understand, like you have this live native Swift client, right? Which is listening to the WebSocket, and it is basically getting this output of this Nix and rendering it into. Or I'm not sure how. Can you just explain that? How does it even work?
Sure, absolutely. So the way that it works under the hood, it is sending a request to the server that is setting up the initial socket connection. When it sends that request, it includes that query parameter. The format is SwiftUI. So it's telling the server, hey, I want SwiftUI code, right? That, in the same way that you would have like a kind of a dead render within the normal LiveView pattern, sends the initial template, and then now we have a socket connection established. So with that socket connection established, we can send diffs the same way we do on LiveView. Now, how those diffs are sent is a little bit different. There is a kind of an AST translation that happens where we take our LiveView Native, we turn that into an abstract representation of it. That's what I mean by AST, is like here's a different way of representing this template syntax, and then that is sent over through the wire to the client. The client then converts that AST back into SwiftUI code, and it understands, okay, here's what I'm supposed to do with this, basically. But yeah, it's like the explanation of how does LiveView work is pretty much the same as how does LiveView Native work.
Have you thought about the idea of running the web server locally on the device itself, much like React Native, for example?
So there is a native application running, but React Native does not have the back-end side of things running on the client. It's purely just, it sends out the bundle. It's then client-side rendering. LiveView is fundamentally a server-side rendering pattern, not a client-side rendering pattern. And so those two things I don't think would really play nice with each other.
Oh, okay. Because recently I've came across a project called Elixir Desktop, and they've sort of took a similar approach, but they made LiveView a client and the server at the
Maybe there's
same
something I'm missing there.
Yeah, in that they are actually running the whole beam on iOS, right? And they have the whole, the server server there on the phone itself, right? So it is very, very fast. But I'm not sure if they support native views. They support the Swift views. Basically, it's like the web view of sorts that you can style in your Heeks, and you
Interesting.
render that. And to get to the native, part, you have the I think it's a JavaScript bridge of some sort, right? So you can
Yeah,
make
I
calls,
don't.
make calls to the native. It's very similar to
Hmm.
the Hotwire, right?
Yeah,
In
this
that
is
aspect.
feeling more reminiscent of like embedding a web application into a mobile app rather than actually getting native, which is like two very different kind of things to accomplish. With web, you're not going to have like the built-in like the things that make native, like gestures and kind of those native features. I don't know enough about that library to speak to it, so I'm kind of talking out of a little bit of ignorance here, but that is the vibe I'm getting, and I don't want to spread more misinformation, so I'm going to shut myself up there. Any other questions? I think we have time for maybe one, maybe two more questions, but I don't want to take too much time because we're at 8:20.
So there is a question in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes, absolutely.
What customs use?
Yep. I am going to be coming out with an article on that. I don't know when it will be posted, but I should have it written before the end of the week. Content schedules being what they are, that might mean it gets posted in 2 weeks to a month to 2 months. But yeah, absolutely. Totally possible.
Awesome.
Okay. From here, let me pull back my, am I sharing my screen still? No, I stopped sharing. All right, from here, forgive me for running over time. Thank you all for being patient. I hugely appreciate it. There is another exercise, so I recommend everyone go to do that. From here, finish any incomplete exercises, refactor some solutions. There's a take-home exercise 4 that's kind of like building and putting everything together. If you're in Montreal, I would love to connect. Happen to meet more people in Montreal. We've already done questions, and now I'm going to throw the floor to Nicolas for open announcements and wrap up.
Thank you very much, Brooklyn. Actually, yeah, it's going to be quick, the wrap up and the announcements. So first of all, if you're in Montreal or you happen to be in Montreal, we will have an in-person meetup in March, end of March. Registrations will open 1 week before, and it's going to be at Mirego. If you don't know the company, they do a bunch of Elixir here in Montreal. So they will be hosting us. If you want to present something at some point, also very welcome. Any kind of level, it could be more advanced, but it could also be introductory topics. Honestly, it's been a while since we had presentations, and I'm sure a lot of people are not Elixir experts. So if you're getting into Elixir and you learn a few things, it could be a short talk that you can present something. That's it. Yeah, so if the recording succeeded, I will share the link on both meetup.com and also Discord. If you want to keep in touch, if you have questions on LiveView Native and all, Brooklyn is also part of the Discord, so you can also use that channel to communicate. And I think, yeah, I remember there was a question at the very beginning for you, Brooklyn, in the chat, and I'm not sure you answered it, but what kind of
Sorry, say that kind of, what kind of what?
What kind of dances or dancing courses you mentioned it, but you didn't.
I love, Lindy Hop is my main dance. So that's like an East Coast swing kind of a thing. I've done a little bit of West Coast swing and a little bit more salsa. Haven't done much social dancing in salsa. Lindy Hop is really like, if you're in Montreal and you haven't been to Café Libre, Green Line Cafe, they do a Mekri swing, Wednesday swing, every week at 7:30. Really, really beginner friendly intro class. Right next to it is a place called Cat's Corner. They do a class every Friday at, I believe, the same time. So you'll probably see me there if you head there.
So, you know, if you're in Montreal, you can also go dancing with Brooklyn. Daya, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand that this LiveView native, do you have plans to Well, I think you already mentioned that you will be supporting Android very soon.
Mhm.
But do you have plans to support desktop like Windows or the Linux or anything else for the matter? Then does it automatically mean that you are going to stick to this Nix, or will there be like a different version of it? Because this is very heavily inspired by Swift code. I can see, right? There's a lot of lot of Swiftiness to the Nix right now, right? So how will that work with other platforms like Android, for example?
Good question. Yeah, very good question. So let me share my screen for a moment, because I don't think it's as Swifty as it might be coming across. So it's very much platform agnostic. So we can see that the .neeks just means native. Android would also use .neeks. The important part is that it's namespaced by .SwiftUI. So if we had an Android version, it would look something like having an Android folder and then home live I don't know what this is going to be, so don't call me on the specific, but something like .android or .jetpack .neeks. And so there would then be a Android specific render component that would say, like, here's what the Android stuff needs to do, and its own Neeks file. This is assuming no patterns change. It's a very active library, so patterns do change. But if we were to just continue what we see here, none of it is SwiftUI specific. It's very much platform agnostic.
Okay.
Would
Any like what? Sorry, what did you say were plans for Android support?
It is coming. We have someone working on it. I can give as much info as I can, but right now that is kind of my pat answer.
Okay. All right. Great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diane.
would
Anything
you
else, Nicola?
accept some community contributions, or maybe some early stage attempts to add other platforms, or is the project in a very early stage and it's not recommended to attempt doing so?
We would love for you to attempt. There have been some other people who seem to be building out some clients. Yes, is my answer. And if you want to contribute, it's an open source repo. So if you make changes and you fix issues for us, heck yeah, very much would be appreciated. It's a fairly small team, so there's a lot of kind of internal details. It hasn't been built the way that, say, like a larger open source project is often. They make the pipeline in development easier. We're not really at that phase. So it's not that we don't welcome contributions, but you might have some like how do I get started with this? Reach out to me and I'm happy to help out with that. We just don't have the documentation and material and like, hey, here's how you contribute, here's how this works. So if anything feels kind of overwhelming as you're getting into it, I'm happy to help.
Thanks, and thanks for the workshop. You've put a lot of effort into it. Thanks for answering all my stupid questions.
No, I didn't hear a single stupid question today. So every single question was appreciated. I really appreciate that all of you put a lot of thought into what you're asking, and clearly you're thinking about this and trying to learn it. So you've been a really, really engaged and attentive. I don't know what the right noun is. Class, group, congregation of people.
Yeah.
So huge thank you to all of you. Makes all the effort worth it. So thank you very much.
Let me jump in. I did play around a little bit more with the Xcode 14, if anyone's still on Intel Mac. And I made a little bit of progress, but it's not working yet. If I get anywhere, or if I don't, I'll post something in the Discord. And that's on the meetup.com, or I'll put the link here.
Awesome. Right.
Is there any last wrap up we need to do, Nicola?
No. So no more announcements. No. Is there any other question or announcement someone wants to make? Oh, sorry. There was a question. Is this project backed by Dockyard or
Yes.
some other company?
Yep. I'm Yeah, Dockyard is 100% the originator of this project. It's backed by Dockyard. Everyone working on it is paid by Dockyard. I'm an employee of Dockyard. Yes, this was not like sponsored by Dockyard. Brian was kind enough to show up today because I mentioned I was doing this. I'm doing this because I just want to. I'm not paid to be here. I am just running workshops because I enjoy it. But yes, I probably should have been a little bit more upfront about that relationship. So my apologies for not being upfront. But yeah, LiveView Native and Dockyard hand in hand.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank you.
I was about to say the same thing. Thank you very much, Brooklyn. Again, also really enjoyed the workshop myself as a participant. So thank you again for doing that. And we'll see each other in Montreal, or if we do another workshop remotely at some point.
Lovely. Thank all of you. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening or day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Nicola, would you mind hanging out for just 5 minutes after?
Sure. I'm going to stop the recording.